And I think it's safe to say that the old mindset of looking at our grid and the manufacturers that are producing this critical infrastructure and looking at them as a commodity type market, I think those old days are behind us, and we have to get to more of a modern type mindset of our grid is very critical. I mean, we all understand that, and it needs to be revitalized and it needs to be modernized and updated.
This is EnergyCast, and I'm Jay Downhauer. Today we're talking about producing a steady supply of transformers. We probably don't think very much about them, or breakers, or a lot of the infrastructure that makes up the backbone of the grid, but transformers are a quiet workhorse for our energy systems. They sit out there for decades in most cases, converting the power spun up by power plants and solar farms to our homes and businesses. The loss of a transformer on the grid can make life pretty unbearable. Grid operators and utilities often have redundant feeds, but in many cases all energy can be delivered only one way. I've had projects where a transformer failed overnight. We'd roll in a portable transformer, but those were in high demand and crews would work night and day to bring the replacement online. My guest works for one of those suppliers and is in charge of the global supply chain that keeps these units rolling off the line. He took over the role in the months leading up to the COVID outbreak in 2020. That shot lead times for transformers up from a matter of months to years. I'd assumed that the lead times returned to pre-COVID normal levels, but since then the demand for new transformers has offset the old supply. He says even though manufacturers are now producing 35% more these days, demand is up nearly 65%. Everything from data centers, renewables, and EV charging have spiked this demand. I often call this phenomenon a good problem. In the past, my guest says they could often experience droughts between large orders, which is a huge challenge for a business that requires skilled, heavily specialized employees. I used to believe not much changes for these guys. The needs are the same as they've been for decades. But I'm now convinced that we are in the middle of a transformer transition. My guest today is Travis Edmonds, head of Transformer Supply Chain Management for North America at Hitachi Energy. Hitachi is currently the world's largest transformer manufacturer in terms of installed base and manufacturing capacity. This ranges from those huge high-voltage power transformers to lower distribution-sized units. Being a former transmission project manager, Travis and I were able to nerd out quite a bit on this topic. It was fun to share what we both experienced from opposite sides. We also discussed the importance of their workforce, which relies heavily on skills and craftsmanship you just can't automate on an assembly line. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Travis Edmonds. We were with Travis Edmonds, head of supply chain management for transformers in North America for Hitachi Energy. And Travis, I looked at your LinkedIn profile. You were named to this position in July of 2020, in the middle of COVID. What was that experience like?
Well, I technically took the role in November of 2019, just never got around to making the changes until July of 2020, as you can imagine. It was very fortuitous for Hitachi Energy specifically. We had started transitioning into a new way to look at our supply chain late in the summer of 2019. The way we were structured before, we were very siloed. Each of our factories did their own sourcing activities, their own material planning. They managed their warehouses, all those things, the entire value chain. And we saw the need to consolidate that, to go to more of a regional and global footprint for our supply chain organization. So we had already started putting that new structure in place and pooling those resources from all the individual factories into our central organization, started defining those roles and responsibilities. So when COVID originally started impacting us, here in the region, we started having shipments being delayed coming out of China. And then we started having governors shutting down states and things like that. We were really kind of uniquely positioned having that central group, as small as a group as it was. I want to say it was 5 or 6 people maybe at the time, but I think it really gave us an advantage to be able to have those daily communications with each of the factories and have a central communication out to all the other factories. When we hear about an issue in one state, we could quickly relay that to the other factories in the other states. We could get letters from local utilities or local government organizations for different suppliers so they could reopen. Funnily enough, which a lot of those were the local utilities that our suppliers were actually getting their power from. So it made it a little bit easier for us during COVID, being essential and being critical infrastructure with the Department of Homeland Security. It gave us a lot of flexibility and leeway to be able to work through that. But you hear a lot of times people say you're drinking from a fire hose, but I don't think that there's a fire truck big enough that it could carry a hose big enough for the team that we try to put together during probably the most monumental supply chain disruption that the world's ever seen. So when I think back about that, it was so much uncertainty and panic. And I think that for the team, there was a lot of hesitancy kind of early on. And what's the value in bringing that together and having a more central approach and having that visibility across the whole region? But I think the timing with it, seeing the value in having an organization like that really helped the whole organization, the business as a whole, see the value that supply chain brings, not just from the old KPIs that we always heard about of cost reductions, right? I mean, that's all everybody wanted to talk about was cost reductions. But for us, the way that we came into existence, it's been more around that consistency, that seeing the factories as our customers and ensuring that we're able to build the products that we're planning on building every single day as our main KPI, right? That risk reduction and that security in the supply for our guys that are out on the floor that are building the transformers for us every day.
Yeah, I was really excited to talk to you because, as transmission project manager for Duke Energy, I was seeing this more the receiver side. So a lot of my questions today are going to be from that experience. In 2018, it was announced that ABB was being bought by Hitachi and, Duke Energy. We had a lot of ABB transformers, a lot of them that were on order, and you were at ABB. So you were part of that acquisition and everything. And so how's that transition been over the last 7 years? Because that was a pretty big announcement in this sector.
But it was a big announcement. ABB wasn't really organically grown in the region. They kind of grew by acquisition. I like to tell everybody, think of all those famous American brands you've heard of, Westinghouse, General Electric, Coleman Electric, Thomas & Betts. That was ABB, all those different companies they acquired over the years. Obviously, we were very nervous initially with the change. I mean, it was a big change, as you can imagine. But the sensitivity, I think the understanding from the Hitachi side of the expertise that we have here in Hitachi Energy, previously the ABB Power Grids division that they acquired, the expertise and knowledge that we have as the market leader. We're in 30 countries, 17,000 employees, have the largest portfolio in the world, the largest install base in the world. I think they really appreciate the expertise that we have in that region, the amount of autonomy and independence that we've been given to be able to freely operate and manage our business, especially through all these changes, has really been phenomenal. And the amount of investments, I think last year, I want to say Hitachi invested $600 million directly into just transformers. And this year they announced another $1.5 billion of investments just into transformers. They really saw us out there as an attractive target, and they really wanted us to be part of their portfolio and have our expertise and knowledge. And I think that the investments they're making are really showing that. I personally have loved being a part of the Hitachi team, the One Hitachi organization, the values that Hitachi has, how they do business, how they see the world, their place in the world outside of just doing business, the harmony they search for in the environment and the world is just something I'm really proud to be a part of.
Circling back to the COVID thing, obviously the lead times were affected and, these things take a long time to make. I really didn't hear too much about the lead times changing until the ones that were already in the pipe were delivered. But I'll just give an example. I think I was told that even a big high voltage transformer could be about a 9-month lead item. And then, after I left Duke at the end of 2020, I was hearing stories that it was 18 months, maybe even 24 months. Now that we're kind of past all that, what has changed, do you think, permanently? Are we back to those tighter delivery windows? And are you still sourcing as much around the world as you were?
So on the lead times, on the power transformer side, I would say that those 24 to 36 month lead times are probably still pretty accurate. On the distribution side, our lead times are getting closer to normal. I want to say the last update I saw, I want to think that we were running 10 to 12 weeks, something like that. We're trying to get down to like 6 to 8 on the distribution side. We're really not seeing a lot of improvements on the power transformer side lead time. And it's really more so just a capacity issue, right? I mentioned before all the investments that Hitachi Energy has made, our competitors competitors that have made some investments in the region. There's just really not a large footprint for power transformer production here inside of our region. So a lot of the investments that Hitachi Energy has been making have been in our existing large power transformer factories in other countries around the world. Here in this region, we really focus on distribution. Our Jefferson City, Missouri distribution production facility is Hitachi Energy's largest production facility in the entire world. As an idea for scale, that factory in Jefferson City, Missouri produces more transformers in a year than our South American region and our China region combined. So we really specialize pretty heavily on distribution transformers here in the region. We do a lot of small power and medium power transformer production here in the U.S. We have one large power transformer facility that's in Marin, Canada. That facility is growing very rapidly. We've done some very heavy investments in that facility that we announced this year. We expect to double the output of that facility. One of the big challenges that we have in the transformer space is around long-term viability. As you can imagine, the cost to build a new factory to produce a large power transformer is very expensive. Transformers are not something that can be automated. Our transformers are built by highly skilled union labor in most cases, built by hand, put together by hand. Obviously they have some equipment there to help out, but it's truly a skilled profession. You can't just get people off the street and come in and just teach them how to make transformers in a couple of days and be off to the races. So that's really been the big thing. When I first came to ABB, our business was about 10,000 employees. Now we're at 17,000. So as you can imagine, we've been growing very rapidly. I want to say, we have several facilities where we have about a 30% increase in our workforce, and those are all new employees that have to be trained. So I think as those resources come on board, we have our new distribution transformer facility that's going to be opening in Reynosa, Mexico here in March, primarily producing single-phase distribution transformers. It will be a maquiladora facility supporting that Jefferson City facility. That's just going to add into the output that we're going to be able to produce here in the region. As far as long-term, one of the things that I've been talking about, and I was just in D.C. earlier this week at the Public Power Association conference, that's one of the questions that they have for me too is, as a smaller public power utility, what do I need to do to ensure that I'm going to be able to get the transformers that I need when I need to get them? And, I've been sharing this message for a while with the DOE late in the fall of last year, is we really need something along the lines of a virtual national reserve for our transformers, where all these small local utilities that really don't have that buying power, that aren't really partnered with a lot of these big OEMs like Hitachi Energy for these long-term plans that they have. What are the development plans that we have in all these different parts of the country? And what are our needs going to be for power to be able to support that? Because one of the things that, Jay, I'm sure that you've read and, I read everywhere is everybody's got a different opinion about what the needs are going to be in the future. And you could ask 12 of these experts of what are our needs going to be in 5 years, and you're going to get 12 different answers. So the more that we can look collectively together and kind of pool what we think those needs are going to be able to justify those long-term investments for these factories and have a long-term stable load for these factories. We used to have a large power transformer factory in St. Louis, Missouri that we had to close back in the 2017, 2018 timeframe, just for that simple fact, because we would be flooded with orders for transformers, and we would have our employees out there working, 80, 100 hours a week for a few months at a time, and then we would completely stall out and have no orders for months at a time. And as I said, with this being a skilled labor force that we're using there, that's not an environment that's sustainable long term. In places like our factory in Marin in Canada, government has programs where they can backstop those utilities to be able to make those longer term contracts and commitments to be able to partner so that those investments can be made that need to be made. And that's really, I think, what's holding us back on the large power transformer side, because we're seeing lots of investments on the distribution side, Hitachi Energy included, but just not as much on the power transformer side.
Yeah, and I have no doubt. I was thinking, no way a machine can build these things like a car factory.
Absolutely not.
The folks that you train, is it almost like an apprentice system? I can't imagine there's much formal education that people can get to build a transformer. They must come there and basically be brought up on it.
That's right. We're very heavy in community engagement. All of our factories have community engagement specialists, and we work with local high schools, local community colleges, local tech schools, things like that. We donate our older equipment for them to use in their classes to kind of help train the future workforce. But yeah, some of that equipment is so specialized that we have to use it. There's really not a good way to have training programs. There's a lot of things that we've talked about establishing some programs like that, but it's just very specialized and not a huge growth in that industry. Even if we built a new factory, you'd be looking at a couple of dozen maybe, right? Just for some of those critical processes. So it's a challenging environment for sure. But we've invested a ton in offsite training so where we can, kind of get the basics, reading a tape tape measure, reading drawings, things like that. And then we have, they call them dojos, just off the production area where they're kind of simulating production inside of a production environment. So we kind of step them, kind of ease them into it. I think that's one of the things, the knowledge you have of ABB when you were at Duke is sort of our passion for quality. That's what we pride ourselves on, is the quality of our products. And we want to make sure that before we have anybody touching or building any transformers for us, that we feel comfortable with their level of skill and training in their jobs.
I was kind of surprised that you said you'll have, or we're having gaps in the orders. I just always think that like the utilities need transformers all the time. It's a seller's market.
Well, now, right? But when you go back, 7 or 8 years, it was very much a commodity driven market, right? It was 3 bids and a buy. So whoever the lowest price was, and we had a lot of challenges with dumping from places like Korea and things like that. The problems that you have is the budgets come out, all the purchases get placed that fill out those budgets, and then they have no additional follow-on orders that come along behind that. It's almost like it's seasonal, but it's seasonal based off the budget cycle. So it's not spread out and stable through the year to be able to keep those workers and that equipment running at 24/7.
One of the things I was thinking about when it would come to a job like that, you're almost like an organ transplant manager, right? Because there's 2 kinds of orders, I would imagine. There's the ones where, okay, we really need this now. And then there's a lot of orders that I saw at Duke where they always have a safety stock of transformers. I was involved in what they call emergent work, where the transformer just went and they had to be out there and replace it with a new one. Do you find yourself horse trading? I don't know if that's the right word, with some of your clients, who have orders and be like, look, we need to prioritize this one. We need to deprioritize this one. Do you give yourself that leverage when some clients really need it faster than others?
Well, of course, within each client, as you said, a client may discover that their plan was incorrect. They actually need this transformer ahead of that one. We have a customer success teams in our factories. They're touching base with their customers every week to make sure that we're staying on top of their needs so we can adjust. As you can imagine, the slots that we have for production are at a premium for us right now. One of the things that Hitachi Energy has done is they really invested very heavily in the service part of our organization. Part of our transformers business unit for a very long time has been around how we either refurbish older units that our customers have, or we go out and maybe add some capabilities to units. The refurbished pricing for a large power transformer, depending on how much you're going to have to do to it, 50 to 75% of the cost of buying a brand new one. Obviously, we have a lot of customers that are looking at their plans and some of the increased costs that are out in the market right now with some of the cost factors that are coming into the market. Most recently now with, some of the uncertainty around tariffs and things like that, and looking at ways to make their budget go further. And obviously, the refurbishments is a good way to do that. There's not that much opportunity to steal so much on the finished goods side because, as you know, just about every utility or every customer has their own independent designs that don't cross over to anyone else. I hear lots of people that have estimates on how many different designs that they think that exist out there for transformers, but I always tell them that that number is wrong because whenever you list a number, somebody just came up with a new design.
You're talking about designs. Are you talking about the different voltages? The combinations, yeah.
Connections, sizes, clearances, colors.
Yeah.
It's like, was it Subway where there's a million different ways to get your sandwich with all the different combinations?
Yeah. I've been at 3 different utilities and all of them had different voltage sizes that they did, from distribution. One of my favorite things to do when I go out to a substation was look on the plates, right, of some of these transformers and breakers. And, you'd see dates that went back to the moon landing, right?
Yeah.
And what's considered the average life expectancy is probably about 40 years or something. And there's been different efforts by utilities to modernize the infrastructure. What are you seeing in terms of that? I mean, basically, you've got utilities that need to replace all the stuff that's way past due. And then, they've got so many other demands for all the new things out there.
There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal. I want to say that it estimates that the average age of a transformer in the United States is 33 years old. And as you said, expected lifespan of these things is about 40 years. There's a huge need to replace a lot of the older infrastructure that we already have out there. But as you said, there's all these new segments. Renewables have really popped up. They've grown. The EV industry is growing like crazy. Data centers, right? I mean, data centers are sort of the 800-pound gorilla now that people are talking about, the drain the data center has on the grids. The industry as a whole was kind of really surprised by the surge of all these needs that have came in. And, let's be honest, as we talked earlier, we were closing factories 7-8 years ago. As a whole in this region was extremely, extremely stagnant. There was no investment coming in because we didn't see these growth opportunities that are out there. We were pretty fortunate here at Hitachi Energy. We got a pretty early start. It was around 2022. We started, shooting up the signal flares for our suppliers to let them know that, hey guys, there's a surge coming. We had a big partner day in Jefferson City, and we had about 150 of our most critical supply chain partners come out to our Jefferson City factory. And we talked through this surge and all these new industry segments and all these big developers that were coming to us with all these projects that we're working on and this growing interconnect queue that the DOE had published, and the need for investment and the investments that we were going to start making. And we challenged them to start making those same investments to be able to help us grow. So we've had a little bit of a jump start on some of our competitors, but it's still not enough. As an industry, we were surprised by 3 huge growth things that came in all at once. And we've made the investments now. We're starting to grow. We're building some of that infrastructure out. As I said, we could still use some support from the government on the large power transformer side to kind of help stabilize that a little bit. But our other factories around the world on the large power side and the investments that we've made in the distribution side, we feel like we're very well positioned to support the cycle that we're in now and this growth that we're going to go through right now. But we don't know what's going to be coming behind this, right? We don't know what's going to be coming behind AI, what the new demands are going to be in the industry beyond that. And I think it's safe to say that the old mindset of looking at our grid and the manufacturers that are producing this critical infrastructure that's going into our grid and looking at them as a commodity type market, I think those old days are behind us. And we have to get to more of a modern type mindset of our grid is very critical. I mean, we all understand that, and it needs to be revitalized and it needs to be modernized and updated. One of the places that we fall behind a lot of the other places in the world is because we were so early to electrify, we were sort of creating the rules of the road as we went along. So a lot of these other parts of the world had the advantage to be able to watch what we did and to select the best out of what we did and to be able to see the problems in having so many different voltages and so many different designs throughout your grid and have a more standard way of doing that. So if we're going to go through and really revitalize all these transformers and build out these grids, and we want to go to something more of a virtual national reserve like I've been talking about, you've got to talk about how we can start having more pools of local utilities with more standard designs, with more common spares, especially for, like you were talking about earlier, when you're doing horse trading and when you go into storm season, every storm order is a priority order. So any replacements for storms, that always goes to the front of the line for everything. But when you have reusable spares across, neighboring cities or neighboring utilities, it makes the response time even that much faster.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's often hard to swap out one for the other because the specs might be different. Let's expand a little bit on this idea that one of the things I said in, I think, my most recent episode was, we've probably seen more changes to the energy sector in the last decade than we've probably seen in the entire 140 years plus of electrification, And a lot of people, myself included, just kind of think, well, transformer's a transformer, it's been the same way. But with all these new things that are coming online, what are you seeing as far as the technologies that you're employing and to adjust to all these new kind of technologies?
I would say we're seeing our customers absolutely push our 3-phase distribution transformers to the absolute farthest limits that they'll go from a technological aspect. The hyperscalers that are coming into the industry, they're doing a good bit to help with the standardization. They're coming in and they're saying, I want to buy 500 of these transformers that are all just the same, right? And for a manufacturer, any manufacturer, those are the kinds of jobs that you really want to build because you can go and do those good contracts. You can set up those good production flows versus the way that we typically do business where we build 4 per average per design. It was a bit of a shock for me when I first came over to Hitachi Energy and we go and look and say, okay, we're building 200 transformers today and there's, 115 different ones. But to be able to come in and say, okay, we're going to build 200 transformers today and they're all the same, you can imagine the difference in the efficiencies that you get there.
Also, I think most of these circuits are now more bi-directional because you've got rooftop solar feeding back out into the grid. It used to be just load, electricity just flowed one way, right?
Right.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is something I never got to see was a high voltage DC transformer. We're hearing about some of these big high voltage DC transmission projects like the one in New York. I think it's called Champlain Hudson. right?
Mhm.
Do you see support for direct current becoming a growing part of your business as we're seeing, especially more renewables?
Absolutely. It's a huge part of the growth of our business. I don't get involved in a lot of those projects. We have a separate team that just focuses on our high voltage business. As you can imagine, we share a lot of the same suppliers. We work together pretty heavily on the capacity planning with the suppliers. You were talking about the size of those things. That's the reason why we have to work so closely with them. When we drop one of those HVDC transformers on our suppliers, typically it's about double the amount of throughput time. We're going to have more earned hours in the production side in our Varennes factory this year than we did in the year previous, but the total number of units we're going to produce are going to be less because of the number of HVDC units that we're building.
One of the things I've said earlier is that you're left with the impression that transformers, and I guess a lot of the infrastructure that is on the system, got to be robust, right? Because a lot of it is going to be on the system much longer than, like you said, the 40 years in some cases. And obviously you want to innovate and you want to bring new technologies on, but I've seen firsthand, for instance, we were doing some work on low voltage transmission lines and they had swapped all those porcelain or glass insulators, looks like a string of pearls when you're looking up at a transmission line, and changed it out for black poly maybe about 15 years ago. And the black poly in the sunlight, I think, kind of worn down. So they went back to the string of pearls, they went out to the older technology. And that's got to be on your mind with thousands of hours on it. You don't want it to have to, be replaced later on. That's got to be something that you've got to juggle when you're building something like this, right?
Right, absolutely. I get into a lot of heated debates with engineering on different things. The example you gave is a perfect example. The porcelain insulator is one of the best insulators you could use, right? I mean, it holds up well. It doesn't fade. In Alamo, Tennessee, where we produce our bushings for our high voltage transformers, our old design, our oil infused paper design, and we have our new design, which is the O plus dry design bushing that uses a mesh and resin material, silicone sheds for the insulators instead of a porcelain like we use on the oil side. And so it's a relatively new technology. We've been offering it for 5 to 7 years, but as you said, our industry is very slow to convert. We designed these things to be drop-in replacements for the old design on the oil side. They're better environmentally, obviously, because they don't have any oil in them. They don't have the porcelain in them. So they're longer lifespan. The estimates are about twice the lifespan. They're a little bit more expensive on the cost side, but no one wants to be that early adopter. I remember our sales and marketing guy, when I first came to ABB and I was in Alamo, Tennessee before I took the regional role that I'm in now, and he was telling everybody that by 2030 that all of our customers were going to be switched from the old oil bushings to the dry bushings, that it was just such a superior technology. And no one believed him at the time. But how it always goes is you have a few customers, they'll buy the new technology and they'll have some success and there's no ill effects that come from it. And then you have the other people start seeing the success that they were having and start to want to be a part of it. So now we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars to buy the equipment that we need to be able to support that transition as we're starting to see those orders come to fruition. What you're saying is correct. It really is very slow to change. We have a lot of customers that say, I want to have brand X gauges on all of my transformers. And we go back and say, okay, well, brand X's lead time's 90 weeks now. What about brand Y? Would you accept brand Y's gauges? And sometimes it could take us, months to get approval just for a drop-in replacement for something as simple as the manufacturer's name on the gauge. Our industry definitely, we know what we like, we know what works, and we don't like to take a lot of risk. It pushes us to make sure that we really do our due diligence. We do all the testing, really have really good packages to put together when we share those with our customers to make some recommendations to change.
Yeah. All right. Travis Edmonds, Hitachi Energy, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thanks so much, Jay. It was really fun. Nice to meet you, and it was great being on.
That was Travis Edmonds, Transformer Supply Chain Head for North America at Hitachi Energy. Just before this episode was released, Hitachi announced a $250 million investment to expand their transformer production globally, with 40% of that earmarked for the U.S. That's on top of $6 billion in announcements in 2024. This industry is taking demand seriously. I want to thank Travis for his time, as well as Kurt Steinert at Hitachi Energy and Megan Krause at Highwire PR for setting this up. Megan and I worked together on the Hitachi ABB Microgrids episode, number 98, back in 2020. You can find plenty of pictures for this episode on energy-cast.com, as well as on Instagram at Host Energy and X at Host Energy Cast. All the guests are sent the raw and completed audio the week of release. So far, no complaints. Be sure to leave us a positive review on iTunes. That gets the word out. Music was produced by Sean Stroop at Stroop Loops. That wraps up episode 185. Be sure to join us next week when we learn how one company is closing the price gap on sustainable aviation fuel. Until then, I'm Jay Downhauer. We'll see you next time.